Welcome to Loops and Iteration. Basically, this is where computers do repetitive tasks that we humans don't want to do. This is where the real power and the real benefit of computers happen. Each time through the loop, we have to do something smart, but we can tell a computer to do it a million times really quite easily. And so the basic idea is that at some point in the code, you go back up, right? The idea is that you've done something, let's go do that thing again. And the way we express that in Python is with a couple of keywords. One of the keywords is the while keyword or the for keyword. And so we'll start talking about the while, and in a bit we'll talk about definite loops using for. These are called indefinite loops. So while is a keyword, and this is like an if statement. This is a question. Is n greater than 0 that leads to a true or a false answer? And if it is true, this code executes. If it is not true, the code is skipped. And in that respect, it is exactly the same as an if. You could say, if n was greater than 0, run this code, otherwise skip this code. But that's where things get a little bit different. So if it's true, in this case n is 5, so it is true, so it runs this. It prints out 5, which prints that out, and then subtracts 1 from n, which makes it 4. But with the while statement, it goes back up again, and it rechecks the question. That's another way to say this is here. Rechecks the question. And as long as n greater than 0 remains true, it will dive in and do this again. So it dives in and prints out 4, and then it subtracts to 3, goes up. Checks again, as long as it's there, down it goes again. So it prints 3 and then subtracts to 2. And then prints 2 and subtracts to 1, and then prints 1 and subtracts to 0. So in this case, n right now is, we printed that, and now n is 0, and it comes up. N is 0, and it comes up. Is n greater than 0? Well, it now switched from all the times yes to now no. Okay? And so when it's no, it comes down here, and it's done. So when it comes up here, it skips down to the next line, and then finishes, so it prints off blast off. And we see that when we came out of the loop, n was 0. So that was like the residual value of this little variable n after the last iteration through the loop. And that's because it was 1, and then we subtracted 1 from it, and that got us to 0. So an important part of any loop is what we call the iteration variable, okay? And that is something that changes, because if we don't change anything in the loop, then it's going to run forever. That's what we call an infinite loop. So here we have n greater than 5, and we say while n is greater than 0, which is true, print this, come back up, check again. Is n greater than 0? Yeah, print this. Check again. Is n greater than 0? Print this. And this is when you read your shampoo and it says lather, rinse, and repeat. This is what a computer scientist thinks when they read that. It's like, that would be an infinite loop. You're going to run out of water, you're going to run out of shampoo, you're going to run out of something, right? But the technical problem is that n's not changing. N is not changing. And so what happens is there's no way for this true to become false. There's no way for it just stays true, and so that's an infinite loop. And that will literally run until your computer's battery runs out, or you unplug it, or you hit some escape or whatever. If your computer is spinning in a beach ball and it's got some little weird little thing, it's probably in a loop that is either infinite or nearly infinite. So this is a bad thing to do because it locks up computers. If you write code to do this and you run it on your computer, you will probably get some kind of a spinning beach ball or whatever that your computer, whichever your operating system does, because it's not good to put your computer in an infinite loop. And so we need somehow to have an iteration variable that changes. And in this previous one, I subtracted 1 from n, and so this variable eventually went from true, 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 false. And so it became false. This question became false, which gets us out of the loop. This variable that we use to control it is what we call an iteration variable, because it controls how long the iterations run and when the iterations stop. So this is an infinite loop because we're not affecting the iteration variable. The iteration variable still is n. And then we have another sort of version of this loop that shows that these loops are what are called zero-trip loop. And that is, when this one comes in, this one starts out false. And so it skips it. And so this basically functions like an if statement. So it's okay, it comes in, false, skip. Never runs either of these statements. Now, we have some statements that we can use to get out of a loop. One of them is the break statement, and it's an executable statement. When it runs, it basically breaks out of the loop, moves to the line beyond the end of the loop. So this, wherever we're at, when this code runs, it jumps out of the loop. And so we're going to have a loop. This is an infinite loop. I just told you not to do infinite loops, but we're going to use break to get out of this loop. So while true, remember I said it starts out true. Can it ever get to false? Well, in this case, it's never going to get to false because it's always true. While true, we constructed an infinite loop. And what does this loop do? It asks for a line of input with a little arrow sign, and then we type something like hello there. Goes in. We check to see if the line we typed was D-O-N-E. If so, we break. That's not true. So then we print a line, and we go up, prompt again, print it, prompt again, and this time we type in done. So done gets typed, and so this becomes true. So we execute here, and it immediately leaves. So it doesn't print the word done here. It prints that string to indicate that we've left. And this can be quite a long loop in here. This could be a lot of, and you can even say break a couple of different places. And you usually put the break inside of if test, and as soon as the break executes, the loop is done. It's out of the loop. So that you can think of it as, right, here's the block, here's the de-indent, so it's this much, this is a block. The break escapes the block, right? It gets out of that loop block, the block of code that is the loop. You can think of it as like a transporter, right? You're coming in, you're doing a bunch of stuff, you're doing this, and you're doing this, and you're doing this, some other thing, you're like, oh bang, hit the break key, leave, right? So whatever it is, however much code is in this loop, the break says get out of this loop. Get to the next line beyond the end of the loop. It's not to go to a different place in the loop, it's escape the loop directly and instantaneously. That's the break statement. The other statement that does something like this is the continue. And so continue basically says quit on the current iteration and go to the next iteration. So it skips out of the loop, but it doesn't skip to the line beyond it. It skips back up to the top. So continue says, oh, we're going to go up to the top. Break says, get out. And continue says, don't do the rest of this iteration, but go up and do the next iteration. So we have taken this exact same bit of code, and the only bit we added was right here. So we read a line. If the first character is a pound sign, we continue. If the entire line is done, we break. And so breaking is what gets us out at this point. Get out, and we say done. And what we do is if we find a line like this one that has pound sign as the first character, we skip back to the beginning of the loop. We go back down and we do another input. So we don't print that, but we say something here, and so it does not print the line, so it skips that. So it's like skipping to the top of the loop, not skipping out of the loop. So break skips out of the loop, and continue skips to the top of the loop. And again, same kind of thing. You're running through this loop all kinds of ways. You don't hit the continue. You just happen to stumble and you run a continue statement, and you go back up to the top of the loop, meaning there's nothing down here that you run. The continue doesn't get you out of the loop. The continue goes to the next iteration, basically. It abandons the current iteration and goes to the next iteration. So these while loops are kind of indefinite. You can construct them cleverly. They just go and go and go until some logical condition becomes false. Hopefully, you've constructed all the loops except one. I constructed it so that it would eventually either exit the loop or the condition would become false. It's a little hard to sometimes verify that these things are perfect. Sometimes it's a little tricky to make sure that the loop will terminate. Up next, we'll switch from using while to using for and talk about definite loops. So up to now, we've been talking about indefinite loops, and that's the use of the while keyword that just runs until some logical condition is false or you hit a break. Definite loops are finite. They are going over, say, all the lines in the file or all the items in a list or all the characters in a string or something. And for this, we use the for construct. And it's more predictable. And it's easier even to validate them because we have a set of things that we're going to go through, and it might be a lot, but we're going to go through all the things in the set. So here's a little loop, the for loop. So the for is the keyword. And so while was the keyword for indefinite loops, and for is the keyword for definite loops. So the first thing we see in a for loop is we see the iteration variable is explicitly just part of the syntax. You can pick any variable you like. I happen to pick I, and everyone picks I for integer iteration variables. In is another Python reserved word. And then we have various forms of collections. And we'll find that files are collections, lists are collections. This happens to be a list of 5 integers, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what we're doing in this for statement is we're saying, and again, it's got an indented block, and you got a de-indent, so the block does this stuff. I don't know, one of these days I'll stop writing all those little pictures. I can't help it. But at some level, what we're saying is execute this block 5 times. And I want I to take on the successive values, first time through 5, second time through 4, next 3, then 2, then 1. So it executes this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And the first time I is 5, print. The second time I is 4, print. The third time I is 3, print, 2, 1, and then we're all done. Blast off. And so we constructed in a way that we just have directed Python to do all the work. We have an iteration variable, we have a set of things we want to loop through, and it just guarantees that it's going to run this code once for each of these 5 variables. Or that's another way to draw that would be, run it once for 5, run it once for 4, run it once for 3, run it once for 2, and run it once for 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast off, right? So that's very definite. Python takes care of everything for us. We don't have to have a logical condition to stop or anything like that. It's really quite nice. This doesn't have to be a list of numbers. This is a list of strings. And so I put this in a variable. And this is where you got to be careful because I named it friend and friends, which makes perfect sense, but don't believe for a moment that Python understands what plurals are. So friends is a list of 3 strings, and friend is an iteration variable that's going to go through it. So I stick this list into friends, so square brackets, list of strings, Joseph, Glenn, and Sally. And then I have this iteration variable friend that's going to go through each of the strings in friend, so that means that friend is going to go once Joseph, the next time it's going to run the loop again with Glenn, and the third time it's going to run the loop with Sally. And so it says Happy New Year Joseph, Happy New Year Glenn, Happy New Year Sally. So you know that this code is going to run 3 times, and friend is going to take on Joseph, Glenn, and Sally in successive iterations through the loop. So you can think of the for statement as sort of a complex thing. It is dealing with the fact of when it's time to continue and when you're done. It knows about that, and it also sets I to the new value. So it's like, are we done yet? No. Move I ahead to the new value. Print it. Are we done yet? No. Move I to the new value, then print. On and on and on. Oh, now we're done. All this logic here, this yellow bit, is constructed by you using the for statement. You can tell it what to do, and it just writes the code. You could do this with an I increment or subtracting and a while loop, and while I greater than 0, you could do this. But for loop just does it for you. So for does a few things for you. And I like in. I think it's basically saying for each of the values in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, have I take on the successive values and run that loop 1 time. And that's the in. That in I think the in is a well thought through Python keyword because that's how I think of it. If you're a math person, think of it, the member of function. I think that's the member of. Boy, it's been a while since I did set theory. I think that's member of. So here's an interesting thing. You certainly can think of this as an iteration, but at some level, it's really just a contract that says, run this code 5 times with I taking on the value. So you hardly know the difference between it saying I equals 5, print I equals 4, print I equals 3, print I equals 2, print I equals 1, print I. So in a sense, this is what happens, meaning that the for loop is telling us how long we're going to run, and it's managing the successive values of I to make sure that our happy little line of code gets executed 5 times with the right value of I. That is the job of the for statement. The for statement takes care of all this for us. So that's one way to think about the for statement. Even though this is a more common way to think about the for statement, this is sort of equivalent. And think of those two things as equivalent. So, like I said, definite loops are for lists or lines in a file or characters in a string, and they iterate through members of a set. Up next, we're going to talk about sort of loop idioms, and that's how we make use of loops and how we use loops to do things like find the largest or find the smallest or check to see if a value is present or something like that. So that's what's coming up next. So now we're going to talk about what we're trying to accomplish with the loop, right? We know how they mechanically work, but what are we looking for? Like, what if we're looking for the largest value, or checking to see if 42 is a member of a set or something, or looking for the largest letter, like the max function. And so we're going to construct loops sort of with an idea of doing something to each value in the set that we're iterating through, and then coming up with some kind of result. And the pattern that we're going to do is we're going to write a for loop, and actually in this next 2 segments I'm going to do the exact same for loop, but we're going to do something before the loop starts, set some variables to initial values, and then we're going to do something to every one of the values in our list, and then we don't know what the largest value is while the loop is running. And our goal is, when the loop finally finishes, that we have something, whether it's the maximum, the minimum, the average, the total, how many things there are, how many things match. And so the iterations are getting us closer to knowing the answer, but they don't instantly know the answer. So we have to work towards the answer by setting something and then sort of checking it a bunch of times, and then we sort of have the truth comes out at the bottom. And you'll see this in a second. So here's the little loop that we're going to do, and I'm going to do this over and over and over again. And these numbers, you're going to get tired of these numbers. For some variable, iteration variable in 9, 41, 12, 3, 74, 15. We print out it before. So we're going to do something before the loop. We're going to do something during the loop and after the loop. Right now, I'm just printing everything out. So you kind of see how the loop kind of works, okay? Okay, so here's a little problem. I'm going to show you a number of numbers, and maybe it'll be 1 million or maybe it'll be 6, I don't know. But you don't know how many I'm going to show you, and I want you to tell me, when it's all said and done, what the largest number is. And it's not going to be too hard. But imagine that you had to do this for 1 million numbers as a human being, that you were just sitting there, numbers going by and by and by and by. How would your brain truly solve the problem? So here, ready? Here goes some numbers. So did you get it? Did you get the largest number? It's not so much interesting about what the largest number was. It wasn't that many numbers. What was your brain doing to sort of crack that problem, to solve that problem? What was your brain doing? And what if you really had to do that for 1 million numbers? And they were not little tiny numbers either. They were sort of medium-sized numbers. And you had to do 1 million of them. What would be your technique, other than running away, because humans aren't good at this? But what would be the precise technique that you use? And so here are the numbers. Now, actually, as a human, we love looking at these numbers, like, oh, 74. Pff. But then you ask, like, how did your mind exactly find them, right? Our minds go like, there's 74, right? Our mind doesn't look at them the way a computer looks at them. It just kind of zooms in on 74. It just kind of, but that's not how a computer looks at them. The computer has to look at them as 3, 41, 12, 9, 74, 15. I conclude at the very end that 74 is the largest number, right? But humans just 74. So humans think about this differently. And so we have to realize, the purpose of that last little exercise was to think, when we construct loops, how computers are going to attack this kind of a problem. They attack it sequentially. They don't attack it magically the way we humans do. And the way that you do it is you create in your head, and you probably did it, some notion of what is the largest number I've seen so far, like a variable. And we start and say, I haven't seen any numbers so far, so we'll stick -1 in there. And then you see 3, and you go like, well, okay, that's the first number. It's also the largest I've seen so far, so 3 is pretty good. If we stop now and I tell you that's the last number, the largest number is 3. It's not the largest number until I tell you we're done. We see 41, it's like, whoa, 3 is a bad number, 41's even better, it's way better. We'll keep 41 as our so far so good, but we're not done yet. We've got to keep going. 12, well, the 12 is no good because 41 is larger. We'll keep 41. 9's no good. We're in really great shape. Is 41 the largest? No, but it is largest so far, so we know that much. Now we see 74, whoa, that's way better than 41, so keep track of that one. And then we go like 15, looks like 74 is pretty good. And now we're all done, and we see that it's 74. So what happens is that at the end of the loop, when we know that we kept, the only thing we knew was the largest we saw so far. And when I tell you we're all done, then the largest we saw so far, like just poof, it is the largest, right? Because it's all that we're ever going to see. So that's how you have to construct these loops in Python. So here's a bit of code that does this logical bit here. okay? And so I'm going to make a variable, and remember variables can have underscores in it, and I'm going to call this variable the largest so far, and I'm going to set it to -1 at the beginning. And before the loop starts, remember I said there's stuff we do at the beginning of the loop, and then stuff we do during the loop, and then our payoff is after the loop, okay? So before the loop, we set the largest we've seen so far, which we've seen nothing, so we say -1. Then we print it out. So before the loop, largest is so far is -1. Then we have an iteration variable, the num, is going to go through successively 9, 41, 12, 3, 74, run this block of code 6 times, once for each of those numbers. And we're going to ask, if the number we're looking at, in this first case, 9, is greater than the largest so far, then the largest so far is the number we just looked at, because it's bigger than the one we saw before. So largest so far is the largest up to this point. And then we kind of grab it, basically. So then we print out for each iteration the largest so far. So the first time we get 9, and the largest we've seen so far is 9, because that's the first one we saw, and it's the largest we've seen. Then we go up, we advance to 41. 41 is the num. And then 9 is largest so far, 41 is greater than it, so then we take the 41 and stick it in largest so far. So the largest we've seen so far is 41. The one we just saw was 41. Go up again. Now 12 is going to run. And so we see 12, and the largest so far is still 41. And so we don't do anything. Go back up, run 3. We get 3. Largest so far is 41. Nothing needs to change. Then we run again. We get 74. 74 runs. And that is the new champion largest number. And then we go back up one more time, 15. In this code, we don't know how many we're going to do. We could do 5 or 6 or 1,000,000, but we don't care. We just keep the best we're doing is largest so far. So we get 15, and the largest so far is still 74. And now the for loop says you're done, and we come out. Now, largest so far is actually the largest in the sequence of numbers, which is 74. So this is how, that's a pretty messy slide. This is basically how Python can go through a list and looking at the largest so far, and then when we're done with the list, that is the largest. So you get the idea. We set something up before, we do something to each value, and then at the end we kind of get the payoff of what we were looking for in the first place. So you get the idea. We set something, how to find the small. So up next we're going to talk about more of these loop idioms and how to find the smallest and how to count things and how to do averages and sums and stuff like that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to keep working on this. We're going to do something in the loop, we're going to do something before and something after, and we're going to accomplish different things. So the first thing that we're going to accomplish is counting something, right? Counting the number of things that we are going to be looping through. Now in this case it's kind of silly, but just in general these are called counters. And so let's just say that we had, dot, 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 a whole bunch of these things, and we didn't exactly, we can look at this and say there are 6 of them, but that's not the point. The point is, if we have a loop, and in the loop we want to keep track of how many we've seen, well, you do this counting thing, okay? So the way it works is, you set a variable to 0, this is the top part. Normally this would be called count, but I'm going to use a bad non-mnemonic variable called Zork, just so you don't get too used to it. So we so far, how many have we seen? Well, we've seen 0. And then we're going to go, thing is going to be 9, 41, 12. So thing is going to be the iteration variable. Each time through the loop, we're going to add 1 to Zork. Increment is another word for this. Zork equals Zork plus 1. We print out the thing we're looking at, and we print out the current value for Zork. So the first time through 9, and then that's the first thing we saw. 41, the second. So, and each time this goes up by 1. It doesn't really matter what these things are, but then we run this many times, and when we're done, and we say, okay, loop is all done, right? There's the end of the block. And when it's all said and done, there were 6 things. Now again, 6 is kind of obvious. We could just look at it and know that there are 6. But this is a way to keep track of the number of times the loop is executed. You set it to 0 at the place, you add 1 to it, and then you print it out at the end. At the beginning, before it starts, set it to 0, add 1 each time through, and then print out the count at the end. So that's counting. The next thing we're going to do is total up a series of values. So in this case, we're going to total them up. Makes a little more sense now. And we're going to have another variable, Zork. I would probably call this total, during the loop it'll be the running total, and at the end of the loop it will be the total. And so total equals 0 before. That's the running total of what we've seen. So now 9 comes out, and 0 plus 9 is 9. So the running total is 9, and 9 was what we looked at. Then 41 comes in. Then we take 9 plus 41. The running total is 50. We read 41. Go back up. 12 comes in. 50 plus 12 is 62. So that's our running total. Next time we get 3. 62 plus 3 is 65. So this line prints out. Then we get 74. So 65 plus 74. 65 plus 74 is 139. So that's the running total. We go and do the last one, 15. 139 plus 15 is 154. We print that out. And now it goes back up, but the for loop is done. So out we come. So at the end, when it's all said and done, this running total becomes the total, 154. So we certainly when you print all this stuff out, right, you wouldn't print that out. But at the end, if you do this, and so the difference between the count and the total is instead of adding 1 here, you add the thing you're running that you're totaling up. So that's how we compute totals. And of course, we can do this with an average, right? So now we're going to have a counter, which we set to 0, a running total, which we set to 0 in the variable sum. We're going to print out 0, 0, so the count and the total is 0. We run through each time through, we add 1. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 each time through. Then we have the sum equals sum plus value, so 9, 50, 62, 65, 139, 54. So this is the running total. This is the count. Actually, that's the sum in this case, the sum variable. And then this is the thing that we were reading in. And then we finally get done, because there was only 6 things. The for loop dumps us out. And then we got, oh, okay, how many did we get? We got 6. What was the total? It was 154. And then divide sum by count, and that should be 25.0. Okay, and so we divide sum by count, and now we have calculated the average. Actually, this should be 154 divided by 6. I think that should be 25.6666 or something like that. Okay, so you get the idea. And so you sum, and so you can do more than one of these things in a particular loop. Now, filtering is the idea that we're looking for something that meets some criteria. So we're going to go through and look at all the things in the loop, and we're trying to figure out if something is greater than 20, and we're going to declare that large number. So this is how you put an if in a loop. And so sometimes this loop will do nothing. Sometimes this loop will print out large number. And so value is going to be 9, and that's false, so it doesn't do anything. Value is 41, that's true, so it prints out this. Value is 12, so it does nothing. Value is 3, it does nothing. Value is 74, and so it prints this out. Value is 15, so that's false. It's done. Now the for loop knows, oh, we're done. Go on to the next line. Okay? So this is kind of a filtering pattern where we're going to do some if statement and conditionally run some code based on the value that we're looking at for now. So that's like searching for large numbers in our long list of numbers. Sometimes instead of printing something out in the middle of the loop, just like in functions, we don't often print in functions. We tend to prefer using return values. Sometimes we just want a variable that tells us whether something was found or not. And so we're going to use a Boolean variable. So a Boolean is a knows, oh, we're done. Go on to the next line. Okay, so this return values stays false. We have 41, it stays false. We have 12, it stays false. Now we have 3, this all of a sudden clicks to true. And so then we change the variable found, which is the same found here, to be true. So this time when we come up through 3, we run this code, then we print this, and it's true. Now at 74, this is false, but we've changed the variable for found, so it doesn't change back to false. So we run the rest of the loop, and when we're done, true. And so at some level, if you didn't print all this stuff out, before, after, that means we found a 3. There could be a million times that we ran this. And all we know when we're done is there was a 3 in there. So that's what's saying. Found starts out false, it loops and loops and loops and loops, and if it ever finds it, then found becomes true, and then we can detect at the bottom of the loop, yes, we found it. Yes, that happened. No matter how many numbers we looked at, one of them, at one point, at least one of them, was a 3. Now, if we were a little tricky, we would realize that we could put a break right here. Right there. Because once it's true, it's not going to go back to false, so we could stop. So we've done a bunch of different things. things, right? We found the largest, we searched for a value, we did some sums, we did some break right here. Right there, because once it's true, it's not going to go back to false, so we could stop. So we've done a bunch of different things, right? We found the largest, we searched for a value, we did some sums, we did some averages, and now we're going to do the smallest value. And so just going to go back to false. No matter how many numbers we go back to false. So we could stop. So, and then 15 doesn't review what we did for the largest value. Okay, and so we have this variable called largest so far that we set to -1, and then we print it out and it starts being -1. And then we're going to go through this loop, 9, and the largest so far is 9, and then we go 41, we like that one better, and then we like 12, we don't like that, we like 3, we don't like that, 74, we keep that, and then 15 doesn't make any difference, and then it pops out, and we get 74. That is the largest, not the largest so far, but the largest you would get. So the question is, what would we do to change this to make it search for the smallest value in the list? Now you can look. Humans are good at this. Like, hey, what's the smallest value? It's 3. Yeah, of course, you know that. Now we got to think like a computer. How are we going to find the smallest value in the list? What would we change here? What are some of the things you might change? Well, there's at least a couple things you would change, right? So the first thing you would do is let's just change this from a greater than sign to a less than sign. And let's just change the word large to small. Is that going to fix it? Take a second. If I change all the word largest to the word smallest, and I change the greater than to a less than, is that going to fix it? If I did that, what number is going to come out here? Is it going to be 3? Is that going to come out? So, like, if I did this, is that going to make it better? Is it going to print 3? Obviously, if I'm staring at you, probably it's not going to. This was a trick question, right? It was a trick question. This is what happens when you run it. So, we start out. Smallest so far is -1. We come in with 9. Is 9 less than -1? No, it is not. So we skip. So the smallest we've seen so far is -1. We go back up. Is 41 less than -1? No, it is not. So we skip. So the smallest so far is -1. 12? No. 3 is not smaller than -1. 74 is not smaller than -1. 15 is not smaller than -1. So out we come, and the smallest we've seen so far is -1. No, it is not. So what's the flaw in our logic here? First off, the word smallest so far doesn't mean anything. This could be GORP or ZAP or X. So just changing the variable to say smallest so far is highly misleading. Okay? So at this point right at the screen to the one place that is the fallacy, the mistake in this code. You pointed right here, you're correct. So far was that these were positive numbers. And smallest so far, smallest and the smallest possible number. So what number might we put there to make this work better? Well, some of you might suggest that we would just say, oh, that'll be okay. I'll make that be 100, and it's going to work fine, right? And so 9 will tick, 41 will ignore. That's fine. That would work if you made it 100. But then what if there was 3-digit numbers in here? How would that work? Well, like, oh, or like more. As a matter of fact, that largest so far code that we did, if there were negative numbers and they're all negative, this is not going to work so well. Wait, largest so far. Yeah. This is just not going to work very well. Because what if they're all negative numbers? We just assumed they were positive numbers, and it worked just fine, didn't it? Whoops. Okay. So there's kind of a flaw. We were using this -1. There's a word for it. It's kind of like a flag value. It's not really the smallest number we've seen. It's like an indicator that we haven't seen any numbers. And we can't really pick a number for this. Frankly, either in the largest or the smallest. It's just not going to work. And so what are we going to do? Okay, so this is what we do. We have yet another type of variable. Remember I had Boolean, true and false, integer, floating point. There's a variable called none type. None. And it only has one constant in it. So Booleans have true and false. Integers have a whole bunch, and then floats have a whole bunch, and none types have one thing, none. We think of it as the absence of a value, the lack of a value, okay? And so what we're going to do instead is in our smallest variable that we're going to do, we're going to say, you know what, before this loop starts, the smallest number we've seen is nothing. We've seen no numbers whatsoever, and that's going to be our marker to indicate that we've seen no numbers, okay? This is kind of like the found code, where we set found to be false, and then later we set found to be true. But we're going to use smallest equals none. None is a variable, a value that we can distinctly detect different than numbers. Okay, so we can say, is the contents of smallest none? If smallest is none, is like it's more powerful than double equal sign. It means, is it exactly the same as? And so if we are asking, is smallest none? That's only true if we've got a none in there. If we put 17 in, smallest is not none. So this is how it works. We start with smallest equals none, and then in the code we have a little bit more intelligence. If smallest is none, this means that it's the first time. If the smallest is none, smallest is value. So 9 is coming in here. And so if the smallest that we've seen so far is empty, we have seen nothing, then we'll grab the first one as the smallest one. So our 9 becomes the smallest one. And so that's how we print out the smallest so far is 9. We just saw 9. Then we come up. The second time through this loop, this is going to always be false from now on because smallest is a number and number is not none. Okay, so we have this flag value that's none just for the first time through the loop. So that's false, so it's going to run here. Elif value is less than the smallest, which is 41. Is 41 less than 9 in this case? And the answer is no, it is not. So it stays 9. Then 12. 3 works, so 3 causes this code to run, so we grab it. So 3 is it. Then we go through 74 and 15. It runs 2 more times. And then when we're all done, we get 3. This is a flag value that we're checking. And through the loop, it'll only be smallest will only be none the first time through the loop. But after that, we'll just ignore this little part. This is another way to think about this is priming us. This is getting started. Okay, and this technique is a good way to do the largest and the smallest, to use this none, and then have a little bit of code that triggers the first time through the loop to get your sort of loop carried variable set up. Okay, so the is and is not operator, they're both operators. They're like is and is not are like less than or equal to or not equal to. They don't hurt their operands and they return you a true or a false. Okay, so is none and is not is also a logical operator. And there are other times we use it. You shouldn't use is when you should be using double equals. Usually you're using them for true, false, or none. So that we don't overuse is because is a really, really strong equality. So it's a stronger equality than double equals to. So the double equals is mathematically equal to with potential conversion, but is a stronger thing. But and is not is the opposite of is. Okay, so in this chapter we've talked about some definite loops, some indefinite loops, break to get out of loops, continue to pop back up. Continue works in for loops as well as while loops. Iteration variables, how with while loops you construct them yourself, and in for loops for constructs them for you, and things like largest, smallest, counting, average, etc., etc., etc. So we looked at some loop idioms where you do something at the beginning, do something in the middle, and then you get the payoff at the end. Hello and welcome to Python for Everybody. I'm doing a worked example. My name is Charles Severance and I'm the instructor for the class. And the worked example that we're going to work on right now is in Chapter 5 and it is Exercise 1. We're going to repeat asking for a number until the word done is entered, and then we're going to print the total, and then we're going to print the count, and then we're going to print the average at the end, and we're going to enter some numbers, and then we've got to do some error checking. And we're going to keep on going. So we'll ignore this. We'll just say invalid input, and then we're going to ignore it. So I'm going to start from scratch. I'm going to write I'll start my terminal, start some Atom. And so exercise 05, I'll say pi for e, ex, I can code, and I'll start that at 0.0. 0. So that's the running count and the running total. Now we need to write a loop. And I'm going to write this as an infinite loop, while true, with colon, and then I'll indent. And I'll prompt for a string. And remember, input gives us a string, so I'm going to call this sval.
疯了！我从来没有见过我的表姐这么疯狂过。因为平时我们说任何娱乐圈呐、说任何电视剧啊，她都是那种，谁不认识，然后什么电视剧什么 CP 她都不知